Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the Daily Six. Been doing some intense study here this afternoon, sitting here by our creek in the backyard. I'm in Genesis chapter 4 and 5. Wonder if you'd want to come with me because the news here is good and it's all about walking with God. Get Genesis 4 and 5 open and then let's look at it together. Can you imagine what the whole family dynamic was like when Cain murdered Abel, and then so they've lost a son and a brother. The other siblings that the scriptures record, Adam and Eve had many other sons and daughters. So this whole family's racked by this murder. But then it turns out it's one of theirs, which of course it would be. Who else is there? There's only this family on the earth at this point. But they've lost both a physical son in his death, and then they've lost a relational son as God banished Cain and from the community, and maybe, for all we know, he had to be a fugitive and had to run away. There's so much heartache that this family was wrestling through. And so as I've been sitting here studying this story, this narrative, and making some notes and typing some things in here, there's something the Lord is ministering to me, and I'm asking him, Father, right now, in Jesus' name, would you lift this off the page at my friends that are here with me on the Daily Six? God, show us something really special in this text. In Jesus' name, I'm thinking that Adam and Eve, the dust had settled a little bit. They were feeling a little better, right? Though this kind of tragedy, never leaves you. Maybe you've been in this kind of situation where there's been some type of family trauma and it just never really goes away. But, over time, you start getting adjusted and life begins to get a little bit normal in its rhythms. And so here's what I read in verse 25 of Genesis chapter 4. Where it says that Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth, saying that God has granted me another child in the place of Abel, since Cain had killed him. And that name Seth, the Hebrew, we think it probably means granted. In other words, God has granted Eve. And you can never replace a child who's been lost, but God has given her another gift in Seth. In verse 26, Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. Now, this next little phrase is what really caught my eye. And it says, at that time, when? In the midst of this family crisis, in the midst of all this heartache and people trying to get their feet back under them and try to make sense of the stuff that's going on in their lives thus far, at that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. I find that interesting. Now, we know there's other verses here. In fact, over in chapter 5 of verse 4, it says that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. So there's a much larger family. This family tree is forked, and we'll see here Adam lived 930 years, right? So before all the DNA corruption and all the stuff that would cause life to be a lot shorter, Adam and Eve lived a long time, and this family was forking lots and lots of family, lots of babies. But it wasn't until this family and all these brothers and sisters and all these siblings, it wasn't until this family was in crisis and they went through this great pain that they began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, something else speaks to me in this. Adam and Eve had known what it was to walk in the garden in the cool of the day, to walk with the Lord. They knew what it was to be in the pure and perfect and absolute presence of God. But they had lost that. They'd left the Garden of Eden and they had struggled mightily with the brokenness of sin. And so I wonder if these siblings, these brothers and sisters, are hearing about being regaled of the stories from their mom and their dad about what it was like to actually have a relationship with God right there, tangible. Man, wouldn't you love that? But when they were in crisis, that's when they began to call upon the Lord. Now, if we read down through all of chapter 5, it starts in verse 1. This is the written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created the male and female. He blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man, which is the Hebrew word Adam. And when he lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. So Seth came along that we just read about 130 years into this story. And Adam, verse 4, after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. And altogether, Adam lived 930 years and died. And we can go all the way down through chapter 5, and it's generation after generation after generation until we get down to verse 31. There's this Enoch. He's like a great grandson of Adam and Eve. I don't know how many greats, a lot. When he lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God for 300 years. Notice that. Enoch walked with God. In chapter 4, we read that after this family crisis, men began to call upon the Lord. So men began to understand what it was to seek the Lord. And Enoch, for 300 years, he did this. Generations later. So the gospel, in our sense, the presence of God, the story of God had been passed on to them. And now Enoch has invested 300 years in walking with the Lord. Then in verse 24, Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him away. And the book of Hebrews reveals to us what that actually was. What did it mean that he was taken away? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. Friends, I wonder this Friday afternoon, could you join me in calling upon the Lord and choosing to walk with him? Give God 6 more minutes. See you Monday, right here on the Daily 6.